Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 421, A Hurdle for Squirtle. The episode begins with the Saffron City contest about to get underway, with Lillian, the announcer, announcing it. The first thing that she does is get the crowd all hyped up for the contest by saying that there'd be a lot of good contenders, and tells them about the upcoming appeals round and the battle round. And the audience claps when hearing about these rounds. While May and Harley were currently waiting in the waiting room with all the other coordinators, Ash, Brock, and Max were in the stands watching, while Brock was declaring how much he loved Lillian, yelling as loud as he could, which annoyed Max, since he wanted Brock to focus on the fact that they were actually seeing a Kanto contest for the first time, as opposed to a girl for once. Anyways, after hyping up the crowd, Lillian then pulled out the prize for the winning coordinator, holding it out to the crowd, being the Saffron City pink ribbon. And she explained to the crowd that with this ribbon and 4 other ribbons, a coordinator may enter the Kanto Grand Festival, adding that that should be the goal of all Kanto coordinators. Lillian could sense that the audience was getting a little impatient and just wanted to get to the contest, so she simply just said the rules as quickly as possible, since we all knew them already, and the audience must have as well, and she just had to introduce the judges, and assured the audience that the contest would begin soon. Watching all this was, of course, May and Harley, and May was holding Squirtle in her arms, very excited to start performing. She hoped that Squirtle was as excited, and asked it to do its best, and Squirtle nodded happily, promising to do its best, when suddenly May was very startled to see Harley, who had suddenly appeared and put his hand on her shoulder. Although Harley clarified that he had no intention to startle May, and had only come to apologize for what he called his mistake, which nearly caused May to miss entering the contest. Basically, he was claiming that he just got the registration time mixed up, and he didn't purposely try and get May to not enter, although May informed Harley that she knew that he was lying, and triumphantly declares that regardless of Harley's scheming and trickery, she would win the saffron ribbon. Harley just smiled at this, correcting May, saying that it'll be himself that gets the ribbon, not her, and taunts May a little bit, playfully. Back on the stage, Lillian was now announcing all of the judges, introducing them as Mr. Contesta, the head of the Pokemon Activities Committee, Mr. Sukizo from the Pokemon Fan Club, and Nurse Joy from the local Pokemon Center. After each of the judges does a little introduction of themselves as well, Lillian then asks the audience if they were ready for the appeal stage to finally begin, and the audience cheers at this, confirming that they were ready by the sheer volume of the cheering. Ash, Brock, and Max were among the loudly cheering crowd, but they weren't the only ones, as James and Meowth were also in the audience too, being there to cheer on Jessie, obviously. But both James and Meowth had different views on how they thought Jessie was going to do in the contest. James thought that Jessie actually had a chance to win with his Cacnea, but Meowth replied that Jessie didn't stand a chance, since her and Cacnea hadn't developed a bond at all. Without further ado, Lillian then calls out the first contestant for the appeals round, Harley. And Harley, backstage, tried to tell himself that he would win no matter what, and May would lose, and channeled all the energy he had, determined to show up May in his appeals round. Anyways, upon going on the stage, he immediately sent out his Cacturn after introducing himself and blowing kisses to the audience. Ash and Max were pissed off to see Harley, because, you know, he was May's rival and all that, and a rude one at that, while Brock was especially angry to see Harley because of Harley being able to get up close to Nurse Joy, while he couldn't. James and Meowth were also angry upon seeing Harley as well, since they remembered that Harley was the one who ruined their last plan. Anyways, Harley immediately ordered Cacturn to start off the performance by using a cotton spore. And this causes several small cotton spores to shoot out around the stage. And the audience looks on in amazement as the spores manage to stay in midair, circling each other, as Cacturn does nothing but watch them. Harley was very confident now, noting that this looked very good, and told Cacturn to follow up with a needle arm to make the cotton spores even better. Cacturn steps forward into the cotton spores, which are still in midair, but Cacturn doesn't use the attack and just stands there, which makes the audience, including Ash, Brock, and Max, and the 3 judges, and Lillian, all confused as to what the fuck Cacturn was doing and why he wasn't obeying his trainer. Although Harley simply giggled under his breath and quietly snapped his fingers, which was loud enough for only his Cacturn to hear. Basically, Harley's plan was to order a needle arm, but catch the audience off guard, and Cacturn ended up using it later than he should have. And after this finger snap, Cacturn finally used the needle arm, which caused the spikes from the needle arm to pierce the cotton spores, essentially hooking them on to the needle arms. And with that, the performance ended as the crowd cheered immensely, along with the judges and Lillian, who were very impressed by all this. Even Ash, Max, and Brock were impressed too, with Brock commenting that Harley's use of needle arm was sure original. Even May was impressed, but also worried that she wouldn't be able to do as good from the waiting room. On the TV screen, we then see several more contestants, which all 3 of the judges comment on, including a contestant with a Weedle, a Pidgeot, a Rattata, an Oddish, a Vileplume, a Venonat, a Mankey, a Weepinbell, a Bellsprout, a Alakazam, a Tangela, a Crobat, and a Walrein. Out of all those, the judges were probably most impressed with the coordinator and their Vileplume, who used Stun Spore. But anyways, it was now time for the next contestant, who Lillian introduced as Empress Jessabella, Jessie's new pseudonym, as she immediately walked on the stage in a beautiful red dress and beautifully themed mask. Jessie then smiled, happily greeting the audience as she sent out Cacnea, which James and Meowth cheered for. Jessie then told Cacnea that it was time, and she ran towards Cacnea as Cacnea ran towards her, and when they reach each other, Cacnea jumps into Jessie's arms and hugs her. much to everyone's shock, since, much like how when Cacnea hugged James, Jessie was getting hurt by Cacnea's sharp spikes. Jessie bit her lip in pain as sad music played that she had set up before coming on stage, without anyone noticing, which causes the audience, including Ash, Max, and Brock, to become sad and upset at this touching hug of love and pain. Lillian was especially amazed by this, and comments that you could truly feel the love that Jessie and Cacnea felt for each other, being able to hug each other and show off their love, despite the pain that it was causing Jessie. Everyone even started crying from sadness. Even May, who had been watching this whole thing from the coordinator waiting room with her Squirtle, and Lillian was bawling especially. And some people in the audience claimed that they might as well have been feeling the pain that Jessie was feeling, since they were so sad. Although they quickly stopped this, because they felt even worse, trying to take away the pain that Jessie was feeling, and make it seem like they were feeling the pain too. Jessie was for sure in pain, but she reminded herself that she was doing all this because of her goal to be a top coordinator, and just managing to talk through the pain, she orders Cacnea to use a pin missile into the air, and Cacnea obliges, sending several missiles into the air, which explode on contact with each other, and cause an explosion of rainbow-colored light, which rains down over Jessie, causing the crowd to cheer. As some of the audience even commented that the colored light looked like fireworks. James, hearing the audience applause, which he himself was contributing to, commented that Jessie obviously had this win in the bag. May and Squirtle, watching from the waiting room, thought that Jessie had a pass in the bag as well, and sure enough, the judges agreed, praising Jessie immensely for her appeal round, and they officially let her pass into the next round. Lillian then congratulated Jessie on passing to the next round, asking if she had anything to say to the audience, but she noticed that Jessie did not respond, and was actually frozen in place, since Cacnea was still attached to her, and the pain must have been taking its toll. Lillian then tapped Jessie to see if she really was frozen in pain, and sure enough, she fell to the floor upon being tapped, leading Lillian to come to the conclusion that Jessie had been paralyzed from the pain of the spikes. And she quickly called over Nurse Joy's Chansey, who happened to be watching in the audience, being assigned by Nurse Joy to guard Jessie, since she just had her whole procedure, and Jessie was immediately rushed back into the Pokemon Center operating room again by Chansey on a stretcher that she luckily had with her. Anyways, without further ado, even with Jessie's injuries, the contest had to go on. So Lillian introduced the last contestant of the first round, May, who entered the stage with her Squirtle by her side. When Squirtle looked on at the crowd, it was amazed at first, but then it suddenly lost its confidence, becoming super scared by how big the crowd was, and it doubted that it would be able to put on a good performance in front of this many people. But May told Squirtle that everything would be alright, and it would get used to performing in front of people, and assured Squirtle that the two of them would work together once Squirtle's time came. Because Squirtle was not even being used yet. She actually sent out her Combuskin to use for the appeal round. Her Squirtle just happened to be beside her. Combuskin immediately starts off its performance by doing some gymnastic airborne somersaults, and lands on the ground perfectly. May then does her part, untying her bandana and throwing it toward Combuskin, ordering a fire spin, followed by a sky uppercut. And Combuskin obliges, sending the bandana upward with a fire spin. Then Combuskin jumps up through the spiraling flames, and uses a sky uppercut once it got right up to the bandana, and the sky uppercut caused the bandana to become refolded back into a normal shape. Then Combuskin hits the bandana with one more sky uppercut, sending the bandana right back onto May's head perfectly. Combuskin then lands in front of May, and May and Combuskin finish off the performance by doing a pose by extending their arms, making the crowd go absolutely wild, shouting and cheering. Squirtle was absolutely amazed by the performance as well, wishing that it could do something as good as May and Combuskin just did, and Ash, Max, and Brock all showed its support from the audience stands, cheering louder than anyone in the audience. Lillian and the judges all commented that May's performance was amazing as well, with the judges deciding to move May on to the next round. From the waiting room, however, Harley was not nearly as happy with May's performance, since he didn't want her to move on, obviously. Since all of the performances were now complete, Lillian directed all of the audience's attention, along with all the coordinators' attention, even the ones in the waiting room, to a screen in the middle of the stage, which had the pictures of the top 8 coordinators who had made it through to the next round. The 8 coordinators who had advanced included 4 random people: Kent from back in Hoenn, the coordinator that had a search skid that May beat, and also Jessie, Harley, and May all passed, with Jessie having the highest score, which honestly made sense, because she made the entire audience moved. And James and Meowth were pleasantly surprised that Jessie had actually made it to the battle rounds, despite passing out, and wondered if she might actually be able to win. As for Ash, Max, and Brock, especially Max, they were just relieved that May had made it into the battle rounds. Now it was time for a computer to randomly generate the 4 matchups of the battle rounds, and it was revealed that Jessie would be facing Harley in the battle rounds, while May would be facing a random-ass opponent, leaving Kent to battle another random opponent and 2 other random opponents battling. James and Meowth were thrilled that Jessie was facing Harley, so that she could teach Harley a lesson, and May, who had returned to the coordinator waiting room, was just thrilled, along with her Squirtle, that they had made it to the next round still. Just then, though, Harley came up to May, saying that she was only lucky to have passed the first round, and there was no possible way that she could make it to the final round. But even if she did, Harley declared that he would be the one to crush her in that case, and humiliate her as a result. Although May simply fired back that she would make it to the final round and beat Harley's ass, which caught Harley off guard as he just stared at May, and she stared back. Suddenly, though, a person entirely wrapped in bandages walked over to them. Harley was surprised to see this, commenting that the person looked like a mummy, and questioned who the fuck this bandaged person was, leading the bandaged person to rip off their bandages and revealed that she would be the one to make it to the finals, not Harley or May, and told Harley that she would be his next opponent, revealing herself as Jessie, or rather her pseudonym, the Empress Coordinator Jessabella. Harley wasn't frightened by Jessabella, quote-unquote, at all, confidently stating that she would be his next victim, but Jessie was not scared of him whatsoever, claiming that she would be the one to defeat him once again. And then they both point to May, saying that after they defeated each other, May would be each of their next victims, although of course, this would all depend on if May won her battle, and either Jessie or Harley ended up winning their battle. Without further ado, it was time for the battle rounds of the contest to now begin, with Lillian officially announcing this and pointing to the screen above her, which pictured the first match, the profiles of the two coordinators participating, while the audience, including Ash, Brock, Max, Meowth, and James, watched. The first match was going to be Harley and Jessie, and they both walked out onto the stage and stared at each other with confidence. The timer, counting down from 5 minutes, then started, as Harley sent out his new Pokemon, Ariados, while Jessie sent out her Wobbuffet. May was watching from the waiting room, excited to see who would win, while James and Meowth were confused by Jessie choosing Wobbuffet as opposed to Cacnea for this round, not knowing Jessie's plan, which she went over in her head, smiling to herself, while Wobbuffet and Ariados stared at each other. As we saw from a little vision in Jessie's head, essentially, her plan was to have Wobbuffet use counter, just as Ariados launched an attack, to reflect it back at double the power, and she figured this would make the judges very impressed. And even if they weren't, she could just use the double power from the counter to her advantage to knock out Ariados, which would get her the win automatically. Harley, however, fully caught on to Jessie's plan, unbeknownst to her, as he frustratingly just stared at Wobbuffet and gritted his teeth, because he knew of Wobbuffet's ability to counter, and he didn't want to risk attacking, knowing that he would only get damaged more as a result, so he didn't want to make the first move. May, watching from the waiting room, was wondering why the fuck neither Harley nor Jessie were making any moves. And Brock explained to Ash and Max in the stands, who were wondering as well, that if Ariados attacked, Wobbuffet would just use counters and the power of the attack right back. Lillian and the judges started to get a little bit annoyed with there being no action, so Lillian reminded Harley and Jessie that they had to have their Pokemon battle, but Harley and Jessie both did nothing, which annoyed Jessie as she shouted at Harley, asking why the fuck he wasn't attacking. Harley simply asks Jessie the same question and refuses to make the first attack, which makes Lillian and the judges even more annoyed, so this leads Lillian to announce that she had no choice but to give both Jessie and Harley a yellow card, which subtracted half of the points from both of their scores as punishment for the delay. And we then see the points being cut in half on the screen, and we see that over a minute had already went by at this point. Even after this, Jessie and Harley continued to just stare at each other, so Contesta informed them that if they just did nothing, then they would get another yellow card, causing them to lose the other half of their points, therefore being disqualified from the contest. This makes both Harley and Jessie extremely angry, as they both argue back and forth, telling the other one to be the one to attack first, not them. Lillian and the judges get even more annoyed at this, and Lillian claims that she was about to disqualify both of them for not battling by giving them yet another yellow card. But Harley hears this and begs Lillian to reconsider, and promises to be the first one to make a move so that he didn't get disqualified. And Jessie was thrilled by this, as she had won the argument, basically, with Harley being the one to cave in. However, Harley got an idea, realizing that just because he had to order an attack, it didn't mean that he had to order an offensive attack, which meant that he could order an attack that wasn't offensive, that could bypass Wobbuffet's counter. So, Harley tells Ariados to use a string shot on Wobbuffet, leaving Jessie to excitedly tell Wobbuffet to use a counter attack. But the counter attack was negated when Ariados used a string shot on Wobbuffet, tying it up in its sticky threads. Jessie questioned what the fuck was going on, since counter should have worked, but Harley explained that string shot wasn't an actual physical attacking move, so Wobbuffet couldn't counter this. Harley also adds that even Mirror Coat wouldn't work either, and Brock realized this from the stands, commending Harley on a pretty good strategy. Ariados then pulls on the string shot threads, which causes Wobbuffet to essentially move around like a puppet, being dragged around forcibly by Ariados in multiple different directions, and as a result, points are gradually deducted from Jessie's score. With 2 minutes and 50 seconds left, Harley was very happy that he was winning, and started to dance in celebration, as Ariados danced as well, forcing Wobbuffet to dance along, still being dragged by the string shot, shocking Jessie in dismay at how her counter strategy could have failed, while the crowd laughed and cheered at Ariados' little dance instruction that it was kind of giving Wobbuffet. May was immensely shocked by Harley's strategy, and worried that she would have to face him in the next round a little bit, realizing that he may actually be good, and Brock, Ash, and Max, they were all impressed by Harley's strategy as well, with Jessie, James, and Meowth all stressed that Jessie would lose, and sure enough, Jessie was about to lose, as Harley told Ariados to finish off the battle by flinging Wobbuffet into the air by pulling the strings. As a result, Wobbuffet lands on Ariados' back, and Jessie lost the rest of her points, meaning that she lost the round, and Harley advanced to the next round, as officially announced by Vivian, and the screen showed this, displaying Harley and his Ariados' profile. The audience cheered immensely for Harley's win, while Jessie was depressed and fell to the ground, and James and Meowth fell to the ground inside their seats as well, turning white in shock at the fact that Jessie actually lost, and Jessie was in shock that she actually lost as well, and almost wasn't even able to get off of the stage, but she eventually was able to, and the contest continued. And next up was May versus a random opponent, with May deciding to use her Squirtle, and it was going up against her opponent's Crobat. And Squirtle easily beat Crobat with a bubble attack, making the audience cheer happily. Next up was the two battles between two random trainers, with a trainer with a Walrein coming out on top, and a trainer with a Weepinbell coming out on top. So it was now the semifinals, with May and her Squirtle going up against a trainer and their Weeping Bell, which Squirtle was able to beat by using Tackle, so May officially advanced to the finals. Next, it was Harley and his Ariados versus the trainer with his Walrein, and Ariados was able to easily beat Walrein by engulfing it in a spider web and using the same technique that it did for Wobbuffet, moving it around. So this meant that Harley had advanced to the finals as well. So Lillian officially excitedly announced that the finals of the Saffron contest would be between May and Harley, and officially called them both out to the stadium. From the audience, Brock commented that this would be the third time that May and Harley would be facing off, and Lillian officially declared that it was time for the battle to begin once May and Harley were on stage, but not before she gave a speech about how the winner of the finals would end up receiving the pink Saffron contest ribbon. Anyways, the battle began with May of course sending out Squirtle, and Harley sending out Ariados. Harley made the first move, having Ariados use String Shot to attach itself to the ceiling, and then it swings right up in Squirtle's face, frightening Squirtle, as Ariados then used a Scary Face. Squirtle was so frightened that it took multiple steps back and fell down, although May quickly told Squirtle to recover and use Ice Beam, and Squirtle did this. But, as noted by Lillian, Squirtle hadn't mastered the Ice Beam yet, since it just learnt it, and the attack was too much for it to handle, so it ended up falling over onto its back, and this meant that the Ice Beam was also knocked off aim, so it completely missed Ariados, which was only worsened since Ariados managed to jump to dodge any bit of the Ice Beam that would have hit it anyways, using its strings on the ceiling to do so. Ash was confused as to how the Ice Beam didn't do much to Ariados because of its amazing power, but Brock reminded Ash that since Squirtle didn't have full control of Ice Beam yet, it couldn't launch the attack properly, and we then see Squirtle still lying on the floor, crying and flailing around, unable to get up, since it was knocked so off balance because of the Ice Beam. May pleads Squirtle to get back up, but Squirtle just continues to flail on the ground as Harley laughs at this and mocks May for choosing a baby Pokemon, as opposed to someone like her Combuskin that he actually knew was a lot better. Seeing that Squirtle was still down, Harley told Ariados to use String Shot while it was still up on the ceiling, and as a result, Squirtle ended up getting caught in the String Shot and got lifted up towards Ariados on the ceiling. Lillian was impressed by Harley's tactics, while May shouted to Squirtle, who was really suffering up in the air on the ceiling, unable to escape Ariados, while Ash, Max, and Brock looked up at the ceiling, wishing that they could do something to help, but they obviously couldn't. As Squirtle squirms in Ariados' grasp, Harley then ordered Ariados to use a spider web to cover the entire stage, hoping to earn some more style points, as May's points were dropping very immensely. Seeing the many sparkling webs that were now hanging above the ground, the audience cheered very loudly, as did Lillian, very impressed with all of the shiny webs all over the ceiling, and the judges were impressed as well, making Harley confident that he could win. Harley then tells Ariados to swing Squirtle around, and Ariados does this, spinning Squirtle around in a circle, which breaks the web that Squirtle was attached to, and sends it down onto the webs on the ground, getting itself entangled in these webs in the process. Harley was pleased, since now Squirtle could barely move, and May looked worried at her trapped Squirtle. Harley was enjoying how frustrated May was, and ordered Ariados to finish Squirtle off with a double edge. So Ariados goes down from the ceiling, lowering itself onto the webbing where Squirtle was, and crawls over to it, preparing a double edge, while Squirtle just squirmed around, still trapped to the web, making May's points drop down even more, approaching 0 points. May tries to have Squirtle use a bubble to hold back Ariados, but the bubble has no effect, not even slowing Ariados down a bit, as Ariados just uses its legs to block the bubbles, making May grit her teeth in frustration as her points kept going down, and Ariados crawled faster and faster towards Squirtle. Just as the double edge was about to make contact, though, May remembered what happened when she tried to attack with Ice Beam. The force of the attack sent Squirtle flying backwards, so May realized that she could use the power of the Ice Beam and Squirtle's lack of control over it to her advantage in this case, and ordered Squirtle to use Ice Beam, and Squirtle obliged. So Squirtle got sent back, and therefore it crashed through the web onto the stadium below the web, and now free. Also, the Ice Beam hit Ariados, freezing it into a block of ice, and the webs were also frozen as well, because the Ice Beam went super ballistic at the end there, and practically freeze the whole area almost. Lillian, the crowd, Brock, Max, and Ash were all amazed by this tactic that May had just pulled off, while Brock, Max, and Ash even stood up and shouted support towards May. Harley, however, was not nearly as pleased, stepping back in surprise at what had happened, and also at the fact that now he was like 80% done with his points. He was almost out. Harley was then even more surprised when May told Squirtle to use Bubble. So Squirtle gets its bubble ready as it jumps onto the frozen web that it was on before, and runs towards Ariados, hitting it with a bubble, which shatters the ice that encased Ariados and sended Ariados flying backward. Ariados tried to stop itself and regain grip on the web, but since the web was frozen, it couldn't get a proper grip on it. Ariados tries to fight back per Harley's orders, but it just couldn't get a grip on the ice, so May told Squirtle to finish Ariados off by using a tackle. So Squirtle glides down the frozen web and smashes into Ariados with a tackle, which sends it falling off the web and onto the ground, smashing right onto the stage floor. Squirtle then lands on Ariados, flexing its muscles and showing off its strength, as Lillian declares that Ariados was unable to battle, so May was the winner, even though the time wasn't up. So that meant May was the winner of the entire Saffron contest. Squirtle was very happy to have won, and comes running back to May, and May hugs Squirtle happily, while Harley calls back his Ariados, while Ash, Brock, and Max cheered for May from the stands. Harley was immensely angry at the loss, and immediately left the stage, claiming that the contest must have been rigged if he lost. Yeah, sure, buddy. The entire crowd then cheers as May sends out her Combuskin so that it could join her and Squirtle in celebrating their victory. And they sure did celebrate their victory by posing and doing a victory dance when May received her first ever Kanto ribbon, the Saffron ribbon, from Lillian. The episode then ends with May, Max, Ash, and Brock all reuniting as they all walked out of the contest hall, and May, Max, and Brock congratulated May on her victory, though Brock admitted to May that her Squirtle's Ice Beam needed to be controlled better, so May promised to train with Squirtle to improve its Ice Beam, as well as all of its other attacks, and Combuskin's attacks too. Ash then reminds Brock, May, and Max that it was time to go to their next destination now that May's contest was over, that being Ash's next Battle Frontier challenge in the Battle Arena. So that's where Ash and the gang head to next, with Ash excited to get his second Battle Frontier symbol. And Pikachu excited as well.